Greetings and welcome to my lovely Halloween home. In here, I will always get candy. True, I do get sleepy from it while they lock me in, but like a really hard dump, I will always find a way to get out. So, while I work at the straitjacket here, let's talk a little about Lovecraftian horror. Lovecraftian horror is a subgenre within horror that instead of gore or shock elements, focuses upon the cosmic fear of the unknown, being able to create an interesting atmosphere very similar to that Edgar Allan Poe did. Lovecraftian horror has also made its way into video games and created some effective monsters along the way. But what about looking even further? What about the Lovecraftian villains? Now, these are not really his actual creations, but they certainly seem like the characters who would appear if Lovecraft worked as a writer in the video game world. These are the creatures and villains in video games that, according to the definition of Lovecraftian horror, go beyond the traditional villain and instead they become entities that embed themselves into our nightmares and become something we cannot fully comprehend. And we love them for it! To give a simple and universal definition of Lovecraftian villains, unlike most villains, you would never imagine these while walking down the supermarket. Also, spoiler alert, look away if there is a game you have not played. So beware of the spoilers and hold on to your sanity, because now we will go right into the darkness of video games. These are my top 13 Lovecraftian villains in video games. Why top 13? Because I'm fucking bored, so let's get going! When trying to find a good starter for this list of bizarre cosmic horror, I turned towards the Metroid series, which is almost cliché when I think too hard. The Metroid games actually possess their fair share of Lovecraftian entities, but they've never really been strong regarding villains. The only exception, my exception, is Dark Samus, the main antagonist of the Prime trilogy. But the focus of their spot is actually something connected to Dark Samus and the very origin of all the Phazon in the universe. Phase. Now, one of the most interesting things in this scenario is that most of the villainous entities of the Prime trilogy might be included in this, seeing as they all represent the Phase's instinct to corrupt and spread its Phazon, which is a radioactive substance. This is mostly represented through the diabolical nature of Dark Samus, but for now, let's just focus on Phase, shall we? Phase is a sentient planet that is the very origin of all the Phazon in the universe, and according to research made on the planet, it is believed that the planet is in fact alive, meaning that it is acting upon its own instinct and maybe even consciously making its own choices. Phase enables the spread of Phazon by sending out Leviathans, these giant living meteors that crash into the planet and spread the Phazon, corrupting everyone and distorting them, also making the planets inhabitable. They are basically the Lovecraftian equivalents of college roommates. As Phase demonstrates, a Lovecraftian villain is not necessarily a traditional human villain, but it can in fact be anything, even a planet, a celestial eldritch body that actually makes living decisions, which makes Phase a good first entry on our list. In the past few years, the fame of SCP has been spreading across the internet at a rapid pace, bringing fear and scared gamers along with it. Most of us probably know of these, since many YouTubers have practically made it their jobs to play and scream at these games. You see? Anyway, now you might be wondering what are the several villainous creatures that I picked for this list. Well, I actually picked all of them. Why? Because without any monsters in any games made in recent years that might have appeared in Lovecraft secret fanfictions, by God, it would certainly be these. Really take a look at these fellas. We have an alien sculpture that can move at lightning speed when no one is having eye contact with it, trying to break your neck. A humanoid creature that can corrode anything it touches. A coffin that can induce horrible suicide-inducing images on television in close proximity. A tall-standing creature that will go on a rampage upon being looked at in the face. A humanoid entity that has a skin that is shaped just like a Renaissance plague doctor outfit and who is obsessed with an unknown disease. And as for SCP-087-B, please let us not talk about that one. Please. Actually, the whole of SCP Containment Breach has a rather Lovecraftian vibe all over it. Lovecraft at several occasions spoke of the human desire for forbidden knowledge, and that upon learning it, it would fill us humans with regret and destroy us physically, or just destroy us completely. Along with speaking of danger with an air of science, the setting of the game seems to be a representation of what Lovecraft was trying to convey, that our desire to know will lead to our demise. According to Lovecraft, humans are truly helpless and insignificant at the grand scheme of things, and all of the SCPs that possess power we could barely comprehend are there to remind us of this fact. Oh my god! Now, what do we go into next? Well, let's try to find sci-fi again, and try to combine it with horror, and see if we can find anything Lovecraftian within it. Oh god, what popular media could we possibly find that would even come close to... Oh yeah! Going from one science fiction franchise to another, we travel into the world of Dead Space, a game full of bloodthirsty enemies and claustrophobic environments that do not really look like something from Home Improvement. Regarding Dead Space, if we were to make a list about monsters, then Dead Space have several worthy candidates, but not so much when it comes to their villains. However, it is convenient that we are focusing upon Lovecraftian villains, because within it, we have our next number, the Marker. Yes, the very driving force behind everything in the game series, we have the Marker, an alien artifact that is a subject of worship within the non-satirical unitology. Seriously, EA, you need to work on that one. You might be confused as to why this little bastard would be considered a Lovecraftian villain. Well, the simple reason for this is because a lot about this thing is pretty much shrouded in mystery, like most Lovecraftian villains, and it still seems to have a conscious mind, and it is consciously after the protagonist. It is also a brilliant example of how Lovecraftian villains can affect people on a massive scale. In Lovecraft's work, people who tried to understand it or grasp its true form was often driven into madness. This is very noticeable when thinking about what happened in each game, especially with Isaac Clarke in Dead Space 2, where his guilt and love for Nicole Brennan enables the Marker to create a physical and hostile manifestation of her, torturing him throughout the game. This, and many more reasons, is the reason why I include this on this list. The Marker, with its manipulation of both body and mind, it is the only thing that could ever make this list whole. Well, as we progress, let's celebrate this holiday of horror and fear by reminding us of how fucked up our childhoods were, by playing games like Super Mario. Okay, I'm not saying that these are bad games, I'm merely saying that Mario has some rather disturbing moments, like the endless staircase or this lovely musical instrument. Ain't life a bitch? But the entry from the franchise does not appear in the main series, but rather the Mario RPGs, or more specifically, Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. In this game, you're sent to the city of Rockpool on the request of your dear friend Princess Peach, in order to find a lost treasure. However, everything changes for the worse once you realize the ultimate puppet master behind all the events of the game, the Shadow Queen. The Shadow Queen is an ancient 1,000-year-old demon who just appeared one day and waged a war against the city that once stood where Rogueport is now standing, because she was born or something, I don't know. Though victorious at first, she ended up being defeated. In fact, the whole story of the game centers upon her revival and how the Shadow Queen's loyal followers are trying to make this come to fruition. They of course succeed, however, briefly to resurrect this eldritch villain, and once she is revived, the whole world is covered in darkness by Hermaeus' spirit being released. How lovely. As a villain, her motive is essentially to take over the whole world enshrouded in darkness. Why? Is unknown, but what is known is that she is a ruthless demon who only cares for her own ends. This makes her somewhat bland as a villain, to be honest, because she wants to essentially just rule everything. What is fascinating about her, however, is her mere presence. One can immediately tell from just looking at her that the Shadow Queen is definitely not something from this world. Her shape is very strange and really gives you an unsettling feeling, something to thank her Lovecraftian aura for. So remember kids, if you see an eldritch entity like the Shadow Queen that is helping to covering everything in darkness, do not try to shout at it and try to control it, because it can result in very bad things. The more you know. As stated with the SCPs, Lovecraft was prone to criticize the human pursuit of knowledge and science, as we are desiring for the forbidden knowledge that will probably only end up killing ourselves. So on that note, let's turn towards Okami. Okami, being a world based on Japanese mythology, is full of different, mysterious entities that, quite frankly, could make it upon this list. However, the villain I chose is interestingly not really a living being, not even an organic one. Let's give it up to the final boss and the main antagonist of the game, Yami. Only first told through Nine Tales, Yami is described as being the ruler of all darkness, influencing everything that has happened throughout the game. He shall use his darkness to be a massive dick, because he's the main villain. That makes sense. Throughout the majority of the game, you feel this creature's presence, so when you are about to face him, you are anxious in seeing what this thing actually looked like. Then as you enter his hideout and stand in front of him, the day of darkness strikes, and it is revealed that he is in fact not a mythical giant monster like Ninetales. Instead, he is a machine, as text of him described him as not being a living being. As he is described as the ultimate ruler of all darkness, he is automatically the opposite of the White Wolf Amaterasu, whose main element is light and the sun. While Amaterasu represents the sun and everything good and natural, Yami, being the element of darkness, arguably represents everything unnatural and wrong with the world, and especially the human nature, and it even possesses abilities that might even beat Amaterasu's, making you ask yourself that maybe darkness is the true strength in our world. In the end, however, Yami is actually just a small creature hiding underneath that machine of darkness. Perhaps this is to show that even the smallest and seemingly most harmless of things can be one of the ultimate Lovecraftian forces in video games. Yami, you truly are the everlasting darkness. I've got a confession. I've never played a Final Fantasy game prior to this list. I'm nothing against them, but kind of like a fortunate wind carrying a letter of love and friendship that will end my lonely existence, it has just never come my way. Thus, I can safely say that Final Fantasy VII is the first Final Fantasy game I've ever played, so with this, I can at the very least give credit to the Lovecraftian villain from Final Fantasy VII. And I'm not talking about Sephiroth on this one. Jenova, with its quite bizarre appearance, is an extraterrestrial creature that landed on Gaia thousands of years before the plot of Final Fantasy VII took place. Jenova then aspired to essentially take over the world, destroying and killing thousands for this cause, something that came almost naturally to her, being an omnipotent entity and all. And quite frankly, I should stop there. If I said anything else, I'm afraid I would give away too much about the game's story, and especially the connection between Jenova and Sephiroth. Most of you probably know what I'm talking about, but for the sake of this list, I will not dwell on it. While this villain doesn't have much of a personality to go upon, what Jenova might lack it there, she makes up for with her Lovecraftian role in the plot. Upon being defeated, she was collected by scientists and has after that point been examined and explored in order to gain more knowledge about her alien nature and her powers. Like I said when talking about the SCPs again, Lovecraft criticized humans as being insignificant, and that our pursuit for knowledge was going to only lead us to destruction. And again, without giving away too much, Jenova really does demonstrate that part. When I did my research, I came across several interesting examples, but Jenova was certainly one of the most worthy ones of a spot on this list. She might not be the strongest villain in general, but being a puppet master and omnipotent, she is certainly strong as far as Lovecraftian villains go, making her our number 8 on this list. Life is full of surprises at times. I honestly did not realize how Lovecraftian this following villain truly was until just recently. Meet the Darkness from, well, the game The Darkness. This is an omnipotent serpent-like entity that possesses the main character, Jack Estacado, and forces Jack to commit various acts, all the while controlling his own little world of darkness. The perfect candidate for the upcoming tea party for all omnipotent villainous assholes of darkness. They have cake. The Darkness is a particularly good candidate for this list, seeing as this villain is almost something that Lovecraft would put in his literature. This entity is mysterious, omnipotent, clearly not out of this world, and even possesses its own little puppet realm that is closely reminiscent of hell itself. Order now and get an all-paid vacation there. However, the Darkness would not be this high up on the list if it was also something of a good villain. True, in a game like The Darkness, there are both villains of the realistic as well as the abstract caliber. However, the aspect that makes the darkness all the more interesting is that despite being a sadistic Lovecraftian villain, the main character Jackie is forced to rely upon the darkness all the same time while fighting it. Thus, the stronger you become as a player, so does the darkness, creating an interesting interaction between the hero and the villain, while still maintaining the Lovecraftian quota. This also makes you seem all the more powerless against this omnipotent foe, demonstrating the frailty of the human nature, something that enhances the creepy power that Lovecraft managed to bring us. Thus, with the power to remind us of a frail position in life, the darkness manages to blot out every single light there is. What is interesting about this following entity is that despite Lovecraftian villains usually being something too alien to insane for us to properly understand, in other words being something far detached from humanity, this following villain is interestingly enough the most human of them all on this list. The G-Man from the Half-Life series.
Rise and shine.
I will have to confess that I've not played much of the Half-Life games, seeing as I only recently started playing Half-Life 2. However, if there is one crowning achievement that I've been hearing about and that I will be giving to this game, it would be the enigmatic and Lovecraftian nature of the G-Man. How do I describe the G-Man? Well, he's a kind and gentle and honorable, but also manipulative, omnipresent gentleman in a blue business suit who seems to have the power to bend time and space to his whim. I don't really think that I could say too much on the G-Man. Heck, for what I know, is he really called that in the game? This is a perfect reason to include this villain this high. Heck, is he really even a villain? By appearance, he's just an amoral being, with no real indication of who he is or what he wants. All that we know is that he's very secretive, following his own moral code, and it's something that we cannot fully comprehend, while also being a puppet master. And that's all. And that is the beauty of Lovecraftian villains, we really do not know. With a fancy suit and powers that are clearly not human, the G-Man is always going to be a Lovecraftian character that makes all of us ask the same question. Who the hell are you?
So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
During your time in the world of Shadow of the Colossus, you constantly got the feeling that things were not right. Every time you slayed a Colossus, which was a dark and messy business all on its own, mind you, you would become infused with these strange and ominous tendrils of belly rape. To be honest, I feel sorry not only for the Colossi, but also for Wanda who has to go through all of this shit. Though, in the end, he only has himself to blame. After all, our next entry warned him specifically of the consequences of his actions, and that there would be a heavy price to pay. Meet Dormin, the mysterious omnipotent entity who directs the actions of Wanda. He's completely shrouded in mystery like the G-Man, but the thing we do know is enough to know that this is something larger than we could ever comprehend. Being an omnipotent entity of the dead, Dormin can apparently control the souls of the dead and bring mortals back to life. When Wanda pleads for Momo's life back, Dormin states that it is possible if the 16 Colossi are slain. It is revealed in the ending, however, that these 16 Colossi were all pieces of Dormin, whose power and essence was split into pieces because of some unknown offense he committed. Considering, though, the whole land where Shadow of the Colossus takes place is void of most life and that simply entering the land for a holiday is strictly forbidden, it is difficult to argue that Dormin is simply misunderstood. It is at this point he borrows Wanda's body before going on a rampage on Lord Emon and his men, probably because he's fucking bored. I don't blame him. Dormin is an interesting case indeed, because he's very fascinating, mysterious, and also very ambiguous, especially in his role as a villain. One can argue that he's not really a villain, since he kept true to his words and did in fact warn Wanda that there would be a heavy price to pay, though he still manipulated Wanda by using his love for the dead Momo in order to give him the hope and drive needed to do this. Was he a bad guy, or just an opportunist? This in turn makes Dormin one fascinating villain, mainly due to how he manages to be mysterious, omnipotent, and strangely honorable while being manipulative. Truly a lovely Lovecraftian entity. A mysterious demon whose crime was so awful that he was split into 16 pieces and sealed away in a distant, forgotten land, Dormin puts the shadow in Shadow of the Colossus. Okay, let's put the cards on the table and be blunt. If anyone from Nintendo is by any chance watching this, I have to ask you, face to face, with all honesty, what the fuck is this? I barely need to tell you about the downright disturbing nature of the infamous Giygas, but I'm still going to do it, mainly because I'm a massive douche. During most of the game, Earthbound is a very colourful and a bright game at that, but nothing really out of the norm occurs. Though what happens when you're close to the final stages of the game? Well, you have to get to the Cave of the Past in order to defeat the too powerful Giygas, because it would be easier to destroy him in an early, weaker stage. However, living things can't travel through time, so your brains are drilled out and put into strange blocky robots. Okay. Then you are taken to the cold and grey Cave of the Past, which leads you to a place that has a floor which is made of pulsing intestines. Oh my, we're in trouble. Then you are greeted with essentially this. This thing is Giygas, who has been consumed by his own power and thus has been turned into practically a mindless eldritch being possessing an amazing power that even you can't fully understand. Everything about this boss fight about him seems alien, strange, and mysterious. What is interesting is that one can argue that the reason he's so distorted, along with the music, is because we cannot comprehend what he is. His power and true form is so bizarre that our human senses cannot fully perceive what is in front of us. Remember when I mentioned earlier that direct contact with one of Lovecraft's creatures was enough to induce madness, and how forbidden knowledge was only going to destroy us? Well, this is certainly one of those creatures, and by extension villains, that seem to induce insanity by just merely getting in contact with it. Giygas is one of the most Lovecraftian things I've ever encountered in video games, and while not as strong as a villain when it comes to personality unlike some other entries on this list, Giygas is arguably one of the most terrifying and dangerous creatures that any living being could ever come across, making him an exemplary Lovecraftian villain. Giygas, an alien that is so distorted that we can't comprehend him, which is why we are downright terrified of him. One of the undisputed kings of horror would have to be the Silent Hill franchise. It seems that unless a countdown has the no horror games rule, Silent Hill seems to find its way onto most Halloween countdowns. These games are infamous for establishing a special psychological subgenre of horror that gets into your head. Either that or Chinese parenting. This franchise is also famous for some of the most notorious monsters in all of video game history, like the horny, sadistic, trigonometry-loving douche, Pyramid Head. However, while several of these creatures are incredibly brilliant and Lovecraftian in nature, these creatures just do not have anything against the entry on this list: Silent Hill itself. The town itself is by far the most interesting concept in the whole universe, because let's get down to it, not only do we have no idea what Silent Hill is, but it is because of Silent Hill that creatures such as Pyramid Head can exist in the first place. What Silent Hill does, however, is performing the world's most dangerous psychological treatment that would even make Freud and Pavlov seem conservative. And let me point out that Pavlov was a Russian scientist who tormented dogs for a living. Perhaps this is one of the main reasons why it is such a Lovecraftian villain. It toys with your mind and makes you question everything around you and within you. The beauty of Silent Hill is that it is not just a place where someone carrying viral strains tripped into their sewers, but it is psychological and metaphorical. The town is arguably any ghost city in the world, but whenever someone enters it, the individual subconscious forms the city itself. One trait in Lovecraftian literature is that the protagonist's sanity is slowly deteriorating around the presence of an omnipotent entity in similar fashion to Edgar Allan Poe. And ask yourself, do you truly know what the entity that controls everything in Silent Hill is? Are you not constantly on guard, just waiting for the omnipotent puppet master behind the town to throw another repressed part of your past in your face? In the end, who is your greatest enemy? The player character, or Silent Hill itself? These are the questions that make Silent Hill the villain that we all know it to be. We may never know what Silent Hill truly is, other than it being a mysterious and omnipotent puppet master who can physically manifest their own psyche, making this a very strong candidate for this list. Silent Hill, because sometimes You are yourself your worst enemy. Well, going from isolated buildings to vast fields of glitches as we turn towards the Elder Scrolls games. And while we are trying to avoid memes and glitching out, let's look over the Daedra Lords. What is a Daedra Lord, you ask? Well, the way they are explained, they are these omnipotent demons or half-gods that control some certain element of either lovely luck or mere putridness. Now, there are several I could have gone with, but the one that really shouted Lovecraftian to me was the lovely Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Lord of Fate, Knowledge, and Memories. Throughout the series, you only hear Hermaeus Mora's voice, but never see a physical form of his, unless you count a statue. This, however, is actually changed in Skyrim, where you actually get to encounter him physically. First, you only see him as a wretched abyss, something akin to a black hole, very fitting. If you have the Dragonborn add-on, however, the picture in front of you becomes much more different. Out of all the entities I put on this list thus far, Hermaeus Mora is probably the most akin to something that Lovecraftian would design, but there is more to his position on this list aside from his similar appearance, because while entries like the Shadow Queen of Jenova encompass something that was practically Lovecraftian horror, both of these were kind of weak as villains. Hermaeus Mora, however, has more of a distinct character and is pretty well executed as a fashion of being a villain, with a Lovecraftian nature, of course. Really get down to it, he looks like something from Lovecraftian lore. It is uncanny how alike these are. It's like seeing two brothers be joined after so many years of being apart. Also, as previously stated, Lovecraft was keen on portraying how forbidden knowledge would drive people insane, something that is part of Mora's lore, actually. Mora is, as stated, an amoral being that houses all forbidden knowledge, making him not only omnipotent, but with this, he's also devilishly intelligent and manipulative, akin to how a puppet master is. In the end, Mora might act in your stead, but is merely looking out for his own interests, in order to expand on his knowledge of the universe and everything in general. He's not necessarily evil, nor is he necessarily good, as he is an amoral being who only does what is in his own interest, yet he's very interesting to examine. It is this very reason that he gets this high on my list. He is one of the quintessential video game villains to represent this legacy, and honestly, I love him for it. With knowledge and power so out of our reach that we could not possibly comprehend it, Hermaeus Mora is one Lovecraftian entity that won't leave our minds anytime soon.
Well done, my champion.
As we approach our number 1 spot, I turn towards the title of the video, Top 13 Lovecraftian Villains in Video Games. If you paid attention, you might have noticed some recurring themes on this list. What separates a Lovecraftian villain from a traditional villain are the traits that separates them from what is human and comfortable. Mostly by being mysterious, omnipotent, and a manipulative puppet master. However, what also comes into play with these characters is how the people interacting with said villains become. Many times merely gazing at these villains can induce insanity and misery among humans. All of these traits point towards one singular, marvelous specimen. The legends tell that this villain never disappears from your psyche, and that you can hear it if you place close attention to the darkest reaches of your mind. Oh, fuck the hell yes. That's right, it's Majora from Majora's Mask. Some of you might have figured this one out by understanding the topic of this video, but I will not reject the notion that not only does Majora make a wonderful villain, but the way I see it, Majora's status as a Lovecraftian villain is only rivaled and beaten by Lovecraft's actual creations. In the story, Majora possesses the moon to come down and have a grand party with the rest of the world. And by party, I mean total cataclysm. Yes, Majora intends to bring forth a bloody apocalypse and seems to give no mercy towards anyone in the land of Termina. Not only does he set out to cause the apocalypse within 3 days, but it is also responsible for poisoning a swamp, causing eternal winter, creating murky water, waking the dead from their graves, and even causing a man to become a young child just a few days before his own wedding, just for her own amusement. Remember earlier what I said about Lovecraftian villains having traits that make them seem less human? Well, that is practically epitomized here by making Majora not only incredibly sadistic, but also through its design choices. Majora, being primarily a mask, shows no emotion, no empathy or mercy. This makes you feel incredibly uncomfortable with the fact that you do not really know what Majora is thinking and feeling, since you can't relate to it. You might have noticed that I was also ambiguous about Majora's gender, and that is with good reason. Like G-Man, one cannot say for sure exactly what Majora's is. Heck, you do not even really know its gender. There are mystery upon mysteries regarding the nature of Majora, but despite these mysteries, it is still clear that there is something to be found within this villain, something deeper, hinting that there is more to the villain than meets the eye. And after all this is said, we still have not gone over her actual forms and her boss battle. But trust me when I say that Majora is an amazing boss battle for an amazing villain. Also, by having the moon approaching, he sends everyone in Termina, especially Clocktown, into misery and panic, as they are not sure what to do at times like these, and fearing the inevitable doom. Remember what I said with Lovecraftian villains affecting people and causing misery, chaos and insanity? This is exactly what I'm talking about. By having the manifestation of evil above the world at all times, it creates so much chaos and misery that I could not justify putting anyone else at the #1 spot. This, and so much more, is the reason I and so many others adore and fear this villain. Majora, my #1 Lovecraftian villain in video games. I'm Mr. Kruger, and happy Halloween everybody. And I think I've stayed inside for too long now, so if you'll excuse me...
I'm going trick-or-treating.